Welcome to this deep dive into a collection of prose translations from Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali.
Mhm.
You've brought us this very special work, the one that earned him the Nobel Prize in Literature way back in 1913.
Yeah.
And we're excited to take a closer look. It's a collection of 103 short prose poems, each offering a window into Tagore's spiritual world and his reflections on life, death, and the divine.
Tagore's work is often labeled as mystical and philosophical, and rightfully so. What's captivating is how he takes these profound ideas about humanity's connection to the divine and makes them accessible through simple, everyday imagery and language.
Right. It's not like you need a degree in Eastern philosophy to appreciate Gitanjali. You might be surprised by how much these poems resonate with universal human experiences, love, longing, joy, sorrow, and that constant search for meaning. So how about we dive in and see what resonates with you in Gitanjali?
Well, one of the first things you'll notice is how often Tagore addresses the divine as thou or my lord. This suggests a deeply personal, almost intimate relationship. It's less about distant worship and more about a conversation.
Oh, I like that. A conversation. And it makes me think about those themes of surrender and devotion that come up. It's like the speaker is actively seeking union with the divine, almost as if trying to bridge the gap between the human and spiritual, right?
And he uses nature as a bridge, too. Tagore is constantly weaving in these beautiful images from the natural world. Flowers, rivers, even the stars. It's not just poetic flourish, though.
Yeah.
What do you think it means when he compares the soul's unfolding to the blooming of a lotus, for instance?
That's a good question. I mean, on the surface, it's a lovely image, but maybe it's also hinting at the idea that even in the midst of the muck and mire, there's this potential for beauty and growth, for reaching towards the light, just like a lotus flower. What do you think, listener? Have you ever experienced a moment in nature where you felt that connection to something larger than yourself?
I think that's a wonderful way to put it. And it connects to another key theme in Gitanjali: simplicity and humility. In several poems, Tagore seems to be pushing back against the idea that you need elaborate rituals or grand gestures to connect with the divine. It's more about appreciating the everyday, the small things.
Like that poem where the speaker offers a single grain of corn to the king. I always loved that one.
Yes. And of course, the king turns that grain into gold. But it's not about material wealth, is it? It's about the purity of the offering, the willingness to give what you have, even if it seems insignificant.
It's about recognizing the value in the ordinary, finding the divine in the everyday. Which brings us to another important theme, Tagore's reflections on life, death, and eternity. It feels like he's constantly exploring the cyclical nature of existence, how everything is connected.
Absolutely. There's this sense that death isn't an end, but a transition. In fact, he even embraces death in some poems, like chapter 91, where he talks about greeting death as a guest. It's almost like he sees it as a homecoming, a return to the source.
That's powerful. So we've touched on some of the big themes, but I'm also curious about specific examples. Should we dive into some of the poems that really capture these ideas?
I think that would be a great way to bring these themes to life.
Okay, let's start with chapter 1. It's almost like Tagore sets the stage for the entire collection in this first poem. It begins with, "Thou hast made me endless. Such is thy pleasure." What does that tell you about his relationship with the divine right off the bat?
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? There's this sense of awe, of surrender to a power beyond comprehension. And it sets the tone for the poems that follow, establishing this idea of the speaker as a vessel constantly being emptied and refilled by the divine.
It's like saying, I'm here for the ride. He's ready to be an instrument for something much larger than himself.
Precisely, and later in that same poem, he reinforces that idea by comparing himself to a little flute of a reed, played by the divine. Again, it's about humility, recognizing your place in the grand scheme of things.
So chapter 1, the setup. Now I'm curious about chapter 11. This one always struck me as a bit of a critique. It feels like Tagore is pushing back against something.
You're picking up on something crucial there. He's not just celebrating spirituality, he's questioning how we practice it. He criticizes empty rituals, the kind that focus on outward appearances rather than true devotion.
So it's not enough to just go through the motions, right? It's about finding the divine in the everyday, in the sweat and toil of daily life, as he puts it.
Exactly. And that's a really important point to understand about Tagore's philosophy. He's not advocating for withdrawing from the world to find enlightenment. He's saying the divine is present in everything, even in the most mundane tasks.
I love how he juxtaposes that with the grand vision he lays out for his country in chapter 35. It's like he's calling for a spiritual awakening on a societal level.
Right. His dream of a heaven of freedom for his nation, free from fear, ignorance, and division. It's a beautiful and timeless message. And it speaks to his deep-seated belief in the transformative power of spirituality, not just for individuals, but for entire societies.
It's that idea of bringing the inner transformation outward, right? Of creating a world that reflects the beauty and harmony we seek within ourselves.
And that brings us to some of the more personal, almost intimate poems in Gitanjali, like chapter 41, where the speaker is waiting for the divine lover, enduring mockery and shame for this unwavering devotion.
It's so relatable, isn't it? That feeling of longing, of waiting for something you deeply desire, even if others don't understand. It makes me think about all the times I felt misunderstood, even ridiculed for my own beliefs or aspirations.
It's universal human experience,
Yeah.
that longing for connection. And what's interesting is how Tagore contrasts this yearning with chapter 52, where the divine lover leaves a sword instead of flowers.
Instead of offering comfort and beauty, it's like the divine is saying, here are the tools you need to fight your own battles, to forge your own path. It's almost a challenge, right? A call to action.
Exactly. And this idea of strength and resilience is really crucial to understanding Tagore's perspective on the spiritual journey. It's not always about blissful union. Sometimes it's about facing hardship with courage and determination.
You know, it makes me think about the way we often romanticize spirituality. We want the peace and the joy, but we forget that real growth comes from overcoming challenges, from wrestling with doubt and uncertainty.
And Tagore doesn't shy away from those darker aspects of the spiritual journey. He embraces them, explores them, and ultimately finds meaning in them, which is what makes Gitanjali so compelling, I think.
Yeah.
It's not a sugar-coated version of spirituality. It's raw, honest, and deeply human. You know, as we delve deeper into these poems, I think it's important to remember that Tagore was more than just a poet. He was also a musician.
Oh, absolutely.
And you can really feel that musicality in his writing.
The rhythm, the repetition, it's almost hypnotic, like you're being lulled into a trance, which I guess is fitting for a collection of spiritual poems, right?
It definitely adds to the contemplative mood. But it's not just about creating a mood, it's about conveying meaning. The way he uses language, it's almost like he's trying to capture the essence of these spiritual experiences to translate them into something we can feel and understand.
So it's not just about what he's saying, but how he's saying it. The words themselves become almost like musical notes, creating this symphony of emotions and ideas.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And speaking of beautiful, let's revisit chapter 61, the one we touched on earlier about the innocence of a baby.
Oh, yeah.
It struck you as particularly beautiful, if I remember correctly.
It did. There's something so pure and unadulterated about the way he describes the baby. It's like he sees a reflection of the divine in that state of pure being before the world has a chance to taint it.
It reminds me of that famous line from Wordsworth, "Trailing clouds of glory do we come." That sense that we're born with this innate connection to the divine, and it's only through life's experiences that we start to lose sight of it.
So maybe Tagore is suggesting that we need to rediscover that childlike wonder, that openness to the world if we want to reconnect with the divine.
I think that's a very astute observation. And it ties in nicely with another poem that explores this idea of returning to a state of purity and simplicity. Chapter 21, the one about launching the boat.
Oh, yes. That one feels very symbolic, like it's about more than just a physical journey.
Exactly. It's about that internal struggle we all face, that yearning for something more, that sense that we're meant for something greater than ourselves.
And it's interesting how he uses the imagery of the passing seasons to create the sense of urgency, almost like he's saying, time is running out. Don't waste it clinging to things that no longer serve you.
And remember how he talks about feeling burdened by faded feudal flowers? It's like he's recognizing that he's been clinging to the past, to things that are no longer alive or meaningful. And that's preventing him from embarking on this new journey, this spiritual quest.
And then there's that faraway song, calling to him from the other shore. It's like a siren song beckoning him towards the unknown. Do you think that's meant to represent the divine call? That pull towards something beyond the familiar?
I think it's open to interpretation,
Yeah.
but that's certainly one way to read it. And what's so powerful about this poem is that it captures that feeling we all have at some point in our lives, that restlessness, that desire to break free from the confines of our everyday existence and set sail for something more.
And it makes me think about how scary that can be, to actually answer that call, to leave behind the safety and security of the shore and venture out into the open sea.
Absolutely. It takes courage and faith to embark on any kind of spiritual journey, to confront the unknown and embrace the possibility of transformation. But as we see in chapter 48, sometimes that journey takes unexpected turns.
Oh, yes. The one where the speaker gets distracted by all the beauty and wonder of the world. Instead of rushing to his destination, he lingers by the water, rests in the shade, gets mocked for his lack of urgency. It's almost like a cosmic joke, right?
It is. and it challenges our preconceived notions about what it means to seek the divine. We often think it requires intense effort, strict discipline, unwavering focus. But here, Tagore suggests that sometimes it's about surrendering to the beauty of the present moment, even if it means getting sidetracked.
And the best part, he ends up finding the divine right there beside him. It's like the divine was waiting for him all along, patiently and without judgment. It totally flips the script on the whole idea of the arduous spiritual quest.
It does. And I think it's a really important lesson for us, especially in today's world, where we're constantly bombarded with messages about striving and achieving. Tagore reminds us that sometimes the most profound experiences come when we let go of our need to control, when we allow ourselves to simply be present in the moment.
It makes me think about how often I get caught up in the shoulds and musts of life and forget to appreciate the simple joys right in front of me.
It's a trap we all fall into. But Tagore is inviting us to see the world through new eyes, to recognize the divine spark in everything, even in the seemingly mundane. And he doesn't shy away from the complexities of this journey.
Like in chapter 77, this one seems to be grappling with that inner conflict between wanting to connect with the divine but also feeling a sense of separation.
Exactly. He acknowledges that struggle. I know thee as my God and stand apart. I do not know thee as my own and come closer. He's aware of the barriers he's erected, both in his relationship with the divine and with his fellow human beings.
He even admits to being afraid to give up his life, to fully immerse himself in the great waters of life. It's like he's holding himself back from truly experiencing life with all its joys and sorrows because it feels too risky.
And that's the paradox, isn't it? We long for connection, for union with the divine, but we're also afraid of what that might require of us. It's a dance between surrender and resistance, between longing and fear. And Tagore captures that tension so beautifully in these poems.
It makes me wonder, what is it that holds us back? What are we so afraid of losing?
It's a question worth pondering. And it's a question Tagore himself seems to be wrestling with throughout Gitanjali. But even in his moments of doubt and uncertainty, there's this underlying current of hope, this belief in the transformative power of love and surrender.
And that brings us to his reflections on death. It feels like he comes back to this theme again and again, but each time it's from a slightly different angle.
Yes, and chapter 90 offers a particularly powerful perspective. Remember how he addresses death as a guest, vowing to greet him with open hands. There's no fear or resistance, just a sense of acceptance and readiness.
And the way he describes offering death the full vessel of my life, all his experiences, joys and sorrows, it's almost like a ritual of letting go, a final act of surrender.
It is. And it speaks to the idea of living a life so full, so rich with experience, that when death arrives, there are no regrets, only a willingness to embrace the next chapter.
And that image of the bride leaving her home in chapter 91, it's so evocative. It's not about mourning the loss, but about celebrating the transition. It's almost like he's saying death isn't an ending, but a new beginning.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really comforting thought, to see death not as something to be feared, but as a natural part of life's cycle, a journey into the unknown.
It makes me think about how we often try to cling to life to fight against the inevitable, but maybe there's a certain wisdom in learning to let go, to trust in the process.
It's a challenging concept, for sure.
Yeah.
But one that Tagore seems to have embraced wholeheartedly.
Right.
And it's this acceptance of life's impermanence that allows him to experience the present moment with such intensity and gratitude. And that's ultimately what makes Gitanjali so inspiring, I think. It's not just a collection of beautiful poems, it's a guidebook for living a more meaningful life. It's incredible, isn't it?
It really is.
To think that these poems, written over a century ago, still resonate so deeply with us today.
They do. It really speaks to the universality of Tagore's themes, doesn't it?
It does. He's tapping into these fundamental human experiences, you know?
Yeah.
The search for meaning, the longing for connection, the awe and wonder of the natural world. These are things that transcend time and culture.
And it's not just the themes, it's the way he expresses them. The language, the imagery, the raw emotion.
Absolutely.
It's all so captivating.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Gitanjali was so well received in the West when it was first published in English. It offered a fresh perspective on spirituality, one that resonated with people who were perhaps disillusioned with traditional religious dogma.
Oh, that's interesting. So even back then, people were looking for new ways to connect with the divine outside of established institutions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Tagore's work offered a path that was both personal and universal, deeply rooted in Eastern tradition, but also accessible to a Western audience. And it wasn't just about personal enlightenment, it was about social transformation as well. Remember that powerful vision he laid out in chapter 35, his dream of heaven of freedom for his nation.
Yes. It's like he's saying that true spirituality can't be confined to the individual level. It has to manifest in the world around us, in the way we treat each other, in the systems and structures we create.
And that's a message that's just as relevant today as it was back then. In a world that's increasingly divided, Tagore reminds us that we're all interconnected, that we have a responsibility to each other and to the planet.
It's like that idea of giving that he keeps coming back to. It's not just about receiving from the divine, but also about offering something back.
Right.
Like in chapter 50, where this speaker wants to receive riches from the king, but ends up giving a single grain of corn instead.
And that simple act of giving transforms the grain into gold. It's a beautiful metaphor for the power of generosity, the idea that even the smallest offering can have a ripple effect.
It makes me think about how we often focus on what we can get from the divine, from life, from each other. But maybe the real key is to shift our focus to what we can give. What talents, what resources, what love do we have to offer?
It's a powerful question to ask ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And I think Tagore would say that the most precious gift we can offer is our open hearts, our willingness to connect our commitment to building a more just and compassionate world.
And speaking of gifts, I have to ask, what stood out to you in this deep dive into Gitanjali?
You know, for me, it's Tagore's unwavering faith in humanity, even in the face of suffering and injustice. He sees the divine spark in every human being, and he believes in our capacity for love, for growth, for transformation. That's a message I find incredibly inspiring.
I couldn't agree more. And it makes me think about that final poem, chapter 103, where he offers his entire being to the divine, comparing himself to a flock of homesick cranes returning to their mountain nests. It's like he's come full circle, finding peace and completion in this act of surrender.
And it's a beautiful invitation to us, the readers, to embark on our own journeys of self-discovery and spiritual exploration, to seek out the divine in the everyday, to embrace the beauty of the present moment, and to offer our gifts to the world with open hearts.
So, as you go about your day, listener, we invite you to carry this message with you. Remember Tagore's words, his vision of a world filled with love and freedom, and ask yourself, where might you glimpse that lost star, that spark of the divine hidden in plain sight? Perhaps it's in the smile of a stranger, the beauty of a sunset, the quiet stillness of your own heart. The journey is yours to make a